All right, so here's something very interesting that we've learned post the announcement that Simon Kinberg would be developing his own Star Wars trilogy. Now, there was some debate, and there still is some debate as to whether or not this new trilogy is going to be episodes 10, 11, and 12, or if it's going to be something entirely different. However, a lot of reports seem to be claiming that no matter what this is, Daisy Ridley's Rey Palpatine Skywalker, whatever you want to call her, is going to have some sort of role in it alongside the previously announced Rey solo film. Now, what's interesting then is that in the week that followed, a new report from The Hollywood Reporter came out and had a lot of things to say about the state of Star Wars and Star Wars movies. So this is really interesting, and we're going to kind of dive into some of the biggest takeaways from this article. I'm not going to read it word for word. You can go check it out. It's from The Hollywood Reporter, talking about Rey Skywalker and talking about Star Wars movies. It's called Star Wars Movies, Race for Rey and the Future of the Franchise on the Big Screen. It's a really fascinating read, and I would recommend that you check it out. But we're going to go through some of the highlights and talk about what this means for the future of Star Wars. So, here we go. And by the way, just to be clear, this is from a very reputable source. The Hollywood Reporter is one of the top sources for news in the movie industry, and they're not claiming that they're not outright saying Disney is all but confirmed this, or, Lucasfilm is all but confirmed this. They're saying sources very close to the matter are saying these things, which, yeah, it means that it's not guaranteed, right? These are sources, but generally these articles from the Hollywood Reporter are very reputable. And so I think that it's worth, taking this with maybe less of a grain of salt than you would with other things going on out there. So basically what's going on here? We have this announcement that Simon Kinberg has signed on to develop a new trilogy. Now, this is not anything new for Star Wars, because if you remember, Rian Johnson was going to develop a new trilogy, and then Benioff and Weiss, who did the Game of Thrones series, was going to develop a trilogy, and none of these things have happened. And so there has been a question now. Is this going to be episodes 10, 11, and 12? Obviously, episodes 7, 8, and 9 made tons of money, but really split the fandom. Last Jedi fractured the fandom. I'm a huge fan of Last Jedi. Totally fine if you're not. Rise of Skywalker, it's okay. It's not great, but it's something of a mind-numbing entertainment watch for me, from my perspective. I know a lot of people hate it. I know some people like it. So again, just fracturing the fan base out there. And Force Awakens, honestly, I'm not as big of a fan as most people are, but that's okay. That's totally okay, because I think that the merits of these films they're still there, right? There's a lot to like in all these films. Well, the question about what is going to happen with Rey Skywalker, are they going to continue using the character? It seems like it, obviously, with that Rey solo movie, and now with the inclusion of her potentially in this next trilogy. And one of the quotes in this article from one of the sources, I'm going to read a couple quotes here as we go through the article, but not really read the entire article. But one of the quotes here says this, quote, "She is one of the most valuable cinematic assets, in some ways, maybe the only one Star Wars has right now," one source close to the franchise tells The Hollywood Reporter. Okay, so basically the article up until this point was detailing the fact that Lucasfilm is in a bit of a bind because they're not sure how to move forward, and they're really not sure the direction that they should go, especially with this new trilogy coming on board. And now this source is saying Daisy Ridley, or the character of Rey Skywalker, I should say, is one of the most valuable assets to the Star Wars franchise. Okay, I'm gonna read a couple more quotes here, and then we're gonna discuss what this means later on. So, anyways, the article is talking about the fact that, again, Star Wars doesn't really seem to have a direction, and they're trying to figure out what happens next. Okay, next little nugget of interest. This is not a direct quote from a source. This is just the Hollywood Reporter saying this. It says, quote, "According to sources, Rey is set to play a role in several movies that are being developed, although which ones remain unclear." Okay, so that's a tidbit here. And then another quote later on from a source says, quote, "The closet is a little bare," end quote, says another source. So, and this is referring to sort of the characters that Disney and Lucasfilm feel that they can draw upon, basically, for these new future Star Wars films. But then it gets really interesting, because this article cites some sources that talk about the mindset going on with people making the movies right now. And I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs here. So this paragraph in the Hollywood Reporter article says, quote, "Some Lucasfilm directors are aware of what others are working on, while others are not. For instance, Taika Waititi is working on a Star Wars movie, Sean Levy has a future project in the works, and Donald Glover's Lando idea has moved over development from the TV to the film side of Lucasfilm. A Rogue Squadron project is also still in development as a feature." There's actually a whole lot to unpack there, which we're not going to do in this segment. Just a couple takeaways. Taika Waititi is apparently still working on a Star Wars film. Really? Okay, fine. Sean Levy, we knew, was going to make a film. And then Donald Glover, we'd known for a little bit that he was going to do a Lando film. The Rogue Squadron tidbit, I thought Rogue Squadron was about as dead could be, because that was announced, 3 years ago with Patty Jenkins at some D23 or investors call or something like that, and haven't heard anything since. So it's interesting to hear that they're still moving on with it. The article continues, though, and it says, this is now quoting an insider, it says, it's a different way of development. There's so much parallel work going on here. Okay. And then the article points to a couple other sources, and they say, quote, to filmmakers and executives, the first trilogy is the Old Testament. And citing another source, this source says, quote, you're being asked to create the New Testament, and no one can agree on anything, and there's a lot of second guessing about meanings. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to read one more thing here before we get into the analysis, because I really think this article is super interesting and giving us a deep dive into what's going on behind the scenes with Star Wars. So this is the last sort of chunk I'm going to read. Quote, another source familiar with the process is more business-minded, noting Star Wars is a nostalgia-based enterprise, and they are running out of ways to create nostalgia. Okay, so let's kind of stop there, because the article, it goes on for a little bit longer, but there's a whole lot to unpack here. So the main thrust of this segment is about Rey and the fact that Rey is going to be a part of the future of Star Wars in terms of movies, as long as the current plan is going into effect, which who knows, it may not. But the point of the article is maybe less about Rey Skywalker as a character and more of the underlying motivations and the symptoms of what is going on underneath all of this. Because here's what's interesting about this: it seems like this confirms to us that Disney's version of Star Wars, and when I say Disney's version, I mean Lucasfilm as it stands right now, because people say Disney era Star Wars, but it's not really Disney era Star Wars. It's like Disney era Marvel. What does that even mean? It's just Marvel. So Disney era Star Wars, whatever. It's just the current iteration of Lucasfilm, right? Kathleen Kennedy's Lucasfilm is currently at the point where they are just trying to mine nostalgia, and I think that is what they're trying to look backwards in order to look forwards, because they are so in reverence of the original trilogy, that they feel like they're under so much pressure to create the next Star Wars, trilogy. They call it the New Testament. Now, there are a few alarming things to me about this article that this article reveals about the current state of Star Wars. However, I'm going to preface this by saying, even though I am taking away a lot of concerning things from this article about Star Wars and about the fact that they're, the way that they're handling the Rey character and et cetera, I want to be clear. Because I've heard some comments, I've seen some comments in recent past, when we're talking about episodes 10, 11, 12, and we're talking about the state of Star Wars, etc. I've heard some comments being like, Disney era garbage, or, I've seen some comments, not necessarily on my YouTube channel, thankfully, but, I've seen comments being like, oh, they should do Rey Skywalker's trash character because, she's a woman and blah, 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 blah. And there was a whole lot of stuff like that going on, just heinous things going on during the time of the sequel trilogy, oh, Finn's a terrible character, he's a black stormtrooper, Rey is a woman, a lot of hatred going to Kelly Marie Tran, obviously. That was awful. And, people hate Star Wars because I'm not going to get too much into this, because they think Star Wars has an agenda or whatever. That is not at all what we're talking about here today. I think this article brings up a lot of concerns in terms of Star Wars. All of that sort of agenda stuff that people complain about for Star Wars, if that is what you are looking for here when you're listening to this segment, if you're here to hear me complain about the agenda that Star Wars and Disney has, I'm sorry to tell you, this is not the channel for you. So just want to make that clear. Now, going back to my actual concerns, this is very concerning to me because it is basically indicating that Kathleen Kennedy, I'm assuming, who is in charge of these decisions and this direction, whatever direction is, Star Wars is going in, is really only focused on the past and is so caught up in the fact that the original trilogy is quote-unquote sacred that they can't move forward. And I am very concerned about that, because here's the thing. It's not like I hate the Rey Skywalker character. And I've said this before, I don't love everything about the sequel trilogy. In fact, I don't really like The Force Awakens as much as most people do, like I said. I don't love The Rise of Skywalker. I do really enjoy The Last Jedi, but I know that most people don't. And I think that, people honestly have these rose-tinted glasses where they're like, Disney-era Star Wars is terrible and, bring back George Lucas. I think people just forget how hated the prequels were right after they came out. And honestly, to this day, I just did a rewatch series of Star Wars a couple years ago. I think the entire sequel trilogy is better than maybe 75% of what's on screen for the prequel trilogy. I really do. I really, really do. So I think that we're all just using these rose-tinted glasses to be like, the sequel trilogy is terrible, blah, 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 because it's just the most recent thing that came out. I think there is plenty of opportunity for Disney to move forward with Star Wars. However, using a character that is from one of the most divisive eras in Star Wars, which is the sequel trilogy era, which again, I'm not even saying is an indictment on the quality of those movies. I'm just saying that era of Star Wars divided fandom. You know what caused some unity though? Was when they made an entirely different character in The Mandalorian. And all of a sudden people were back on board because it was like, oh, this is different, this is new. Star Wars, right, can move forward 600 years in the past, 600 years in the future, and not break a sweat. Because it doesn't matter. You can have new characters, you can have old characters, and you don't need Rey Skywalker to anchor a trilogy. Again, I'm not saying this because I hate the character and I hate Daisy Ridley. I think she did a fine job, and I think the character was mishandled, but ultimately had a lot of potential. I just think it's not a time for us to go back to one of the most angry, divisive eras of Star Wars, and rather, we should actually move forward and tell new stories. Because guess what? The reason the original trilogy was so successful, it had nothing to do with nostalgia. It had nothing to do with, people loving Darth Vader and waiting for him to return. Was that a good thing for something like Rogue One? For sure. But then you see how it doesn't really work in a series like Obi-Wan, where people, they're hyping up the rematch of the century with Darth Vader versus Obi-Wan, when you don't really have a good story around it. Rogue One had a great story around it, I thought. And the Darth Vader stuff was just extra. It was nostalgia, for sure, but it was just extra. And so, honestly, what concerns me the most about this is and going back to an earlier point, they're doing so many things in parallel that nobody really knows what the other people are doing because they're so concerned with just making whatever the next great thing in Star Wars can be when they're not even concerned about just making a good film and a good story. I think that's one of the concerns. The other concern is just that it feels like Disney and Lucasfilm right now, I say Disney, I mean Lucasfilm. Lucasfilm can't move forward without the old characters. They're too afraid to just go way into the future and just start new things. Like, you can still use the mythology of the Force and all the Jedi stuff, but just do something new. And so I think that they're just so afraid to do that it's kind of holding them back right now. So we'll see, because it seems like they're very committed to this plan of using Rey Skywalker as a character in a big way, no matter if the next trilogy is episodes 10, 11, and 12 or not. But I think it's a little concerning to hear all about these things. And again, I have to reiterate, this is all aside from the fact that, all these people who are like, Disney has an agenda or whatever, that's not at all where my concerns stem. That is not at all where my concerns stem. My concerns are really from just the mentality of storytelling that's going on here with Disney and Lucasfilm, as reported in this Hollywood Reporter article, because honestly, I'd love for them to make the next trilogy, and Rey is a big part of it, and it's awesome. That would also be great. I think that would be an amazing outcome from all of this, and we'll have to see about that. But guys, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about this article? Have you read it all the way through? And if you did, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. I think it's a fascinating article, and yeah, really, really interesting stuff here. So let me know in the comments down below.